Hey everybody, welcome to the Art of the Possible podcast. I'm very excited today, very excited to have across the vast waters, all the way to Singapore, the wonderful Ritu Mehrish. Ritu, how are you?
I'm doing good, Rob. How are you doing?
Very well, very well. It's a lovely sunny day down here. How's the weather in Singapore?
It's been warm, but it's been raining as usual. So there's nothing unusual about Singapore weather.
Warm and raining. It's Singapore, isn't it? It's like warm and rainy. So it doesn't, you come out of the airport, it's like the oven, and then it rains, then it's like the oven, and then
That's right. Yeah.
it's
So
fantastic.
the variation is between right now it's 33 to 27. That's it.
Nice, nice. Well, I went cycling this morning. It was point 0.5.
I can't even imagine. I can't even begin to imagine what that feels like.
Yeah, it's a touch chilly, so you really look forward to the coffee at the end of the ride today. So it was very, very cold, but lovely, lovely day. Now we're going to talk all things leadership. You've been a fantastic leader, had an amazing leadership career as a leader, but now you're also a coach and a mentor and speaker on leadership as well. So I'm really looking forward to this. But let's go all the way back, because you didn't start in Singapore. You grew up in India. Where in India did you grow up?
So I grew up in northern India, but not in the city, not in Delhi, which is the capital. My parents came from a very small town in northern India, and it was interesting because where my parents were, there weren't very many good schools. So my parents decided to send me and my siblings to a boarding school, which was
Wow.
further up the north in the mountains. And I know people just think India's all hot, but where I grew up in the boarding school, or where I spent 12 years of my life, that place was cold. Like it would snow, and we didn't have fans. We wore sweaters all the time. So I grew up in a cold place, even though it was in India.
Now tell me, you had boarding school, which is interesting. Was that a co-ed boarding school or a single-sex boarding school?
So it was for the initial part of my years. I was in an all-girls boarding school, and then I went to a co-ed boarding school, which is a very different ballgame.
And what happened? What was the difference between the all-girls and the co-ed? What was the shift maybe when you went there, and did it work? Did it not work? Did you like it, not like it? What happened?
All girls school, same gender school, there is, it's different because, you're just all same. You talk the same stuff. You all go through the same stuff. So there's a lot of homogeneity, like everybody's same. Everybody's going through the same. But when you go to co-ed, you suddenly see, oh, there is this, 50% of the population, which is so different from you are. And you suddenly start to, notice those changes. But also at that age, because you're young, suddenly the thing about, in my case was like, oh, boys, like, they talk different, they think different. And suddenly you saw a very different element even of myself. I suddenly saw myself reacting differently or behaving differently. So
Right.
it is pretty interesting.
That's wow. Now, you told me you thought you were a bit of a nerd at school. Was that true?
Say that again?
Were you a bit of a nerd at school when you were going through? You were a nerd and very big studying, or even a more sporting type person? What was it?
I was very nerdy. Rob, I do have to say this, that if you were growing up in India in 80s, all that your parents told you was, if you want a good life, it's through good education. So there was a lot of focus, at least in my head, I had that if I want to have a good life for myself, I have to focus on studies. And,
Right.
a lot of time, good schools meant that they would enable you with not only live education, but they'll enable you with a global language, which is English,
Yes.
because English is not our first language. So I was pretty nerdy actually. I was a lot into just studying and always trying to come in the first three in the class, and
Right.
I was very nerdy.
Now we're going to flip because you're at boarding school, right? And so your parents had shipped you off to boarding school, so they sort of, outsourced the education, right?
Yes,
Now, of course, we've had COVID-19, and you've got children of your own. You've
that's
had them inside the school, inside your home. How is homeschooling been for you?
right. Where do I start? Okay, so I'll kind of look at it in different ways. So one, it is quite interesting when you're when your kids are at home, but when you're homeschooling them, it's very different because there is a discipline you're trying to create that they get in school, which is very different from home. So to me, like I said, I have two kids, and both are very different personalities. Like both are the boy and a girl, but very, very distinct personalities. So for me, one thing was, and even though you can say that it should come naturally to you because you've been a leader, but when it comes to your home, it's not so obvious.
I agree.
Right? So the way I handle, or the way I was doing things with my son, I couldn't do the same with my daughter. She needs a different kind of managing than him. So one is suddenly you're realizing it's just not one playbook you're playing. It's like, you're customizing it for two individuals. Yes. And then your patience, my God, like I always think, God, I'm very patient, and which normally people had always said that, oh, you're very patient. That's been one of my virtues. But believe you me, it got tested like nothing before.
That's amazing. I think that's fantastic. Just that the two sets of playbooks and different personalities. I think that's a very, very, very relevant for people who are managing teams remotely as well today. But I do remember reading a great piece by Stephen Covey, who made a point, and he said that the child that challenges you the most is the one that's calling out your blind side.
Yes.
Right. And I've found that personally, that's been the case, that, the one that just doesn't see it my way and doesn't go my way, or doesn't quite get my communication style. That's really, they said, it's making you actually aware. He said, it makes you aware of your blind spot. And it's not only your child, will be other people as well. And I guess that's what you found.
That is true. And in my case, it's my daughter. Like, very small example I'll give you. If I tell her, oh, look at your hair, it's messy, you need to comb. And then sometimes, and she'll go, and then sometimes she'll come back and say, Mom, I think you need to comb your hair, it's pretty messy, So, it's the truth. But it's just, we're probably not used to hearing it like that. And,
right.
But yeah, you deal. So you're right. I think as parents, and in fact, there's an article I had written some time back, is about, how parenthood teaches you so much about leadership, and it makes you put that to practice.
I completely agree with you on that. And many people I get in workshops, I'm sure you do, and in speaking engagements we do, I say, how many people are leaders? And so many, so little hands go up because they see themselves as a leader. I must have a title. I must be managing formally these people in business. And then I say, okay, hands down, how many people here are parents? And all these hands go up. And I'm like, guess what? Welcome to leadership, people, because you're in it. As soon as you become that parent, you are in leadership, and you're in a leadership position. And like many leaders, there's no exact book on it. There's lots of books on leadership. I find most of the books written on parenting are by people who have never been a parent. Have you found that? So that's pretty interesting. And so you are in it, and you're kind of going along a little bit along as you go together, and especially if you're in a partnership with another partner that you may have. There's the two of you in this, and I've got 3 children. You've got 2. Someone said to me, never go more than 2 because they outnumber you, and that's true.
That's right.
So, but you're learning along the way, and they said the first thing is make sure they never know that you don't know what you're doing, right? Just make sure they don't know. Yeah. And then sometimes I think that's in leadership too. And we'll talk about that leadership, why leaders are lonely, a bit later on. But I think that's not dissimilar to your point that parenting can be such a great kind of example of what leadership's like.
That's correct.
You've been an incredibly successful female leader, and I don't make any difference between male and female leaders. And now that might be easy for me to say as a male, and I mean that because I've reported to both many, many times. Frankly, I found female leaders a lot better to get on with. I seem to work well with them. What are some of the challenges that you went through as a female leader coming through, and have some of those challenges gone away, or are they still there today?
So Rob, here is where I think I kind of stir a little bit of controversy with what I'm going to say. Look, I actually, in my career in the corporate world, and also as a coach or as a speaker, I actually haven't found anything which kind of says, oh, because I'm a female leader, I'm feeling it like that. I could have been pure lucky. I acknowledge that. I've been very lucky to work in my career with leaders who've never differentiated, between a male and a female. I have worked globally, so I have never felt, discriminated. Like I said, I could be pure lucky because I know it exists. But one of the things I also tell a lot of young female leaders, it's also your mindset. It's also in you to say, start believing, oh, I'm probably not equal, and therefore I need to prove something.
Right.
Because the minute you get into that, then you're already in your mind, you're playing a catch-up game. Whereas what I have done in my career, and that's what I encourage the leaders I coach, is you've got to use what you have to your advantage. So I'll give you a small example. In late 90s to 1999, I moved to the US to start working with GE. And I would go, and I was based out of Atlanta, the southern part, and I would go into meetings, and I was part of the finance team. So I would go into meetings where I would be the only woman, and I would be the only brown woman, woman of color.
Yeah.
But now I could have, and of course with a different accent, most of them were Americans. Now the thing is, I could have used that, of course, could have been like, oh, I'm so different, at every level. But then that I started using that very early on to my advantage, because I spoke with a different accent. When I spoke, people listened.
Right. Love that.
Because I had a different voice, because I'm a female, I got heard. So it's also about using what you have to your advantage. And I say that even today as a speaker, when I talk to conference organizers or when I'm talking in organizations, I come in as somebody who's speaking different, who's probably looking different in a lot of conferences, and also has a contrary view. I talk about things that not too many people talk about. I talk about leaders' block.
Yes.
So I think it's about using your uniqueness to your advantage. But I think before that, it's even recognizing that your uniqueness or your difference is your strength, and it's not a liability.
Yeah. I love that. That's fantastic. So refreshing, and I'm excited for you to hear that from you, because that's how I've always kind of worked as well. And I've never noticed the difference, never held anyone back because of it. But I do acknowledge, like you do, that I have seen it, but it just goes against my value system and clearly against yours. And I love the fact that you're using it, you use it to your advantage. I remember a great case of us. It was a sales leader that I work with, and his hearing wasn't great. And he said he used that to his advantage, which means he had to really, in meetings, he had amazing NPS scores, like really high customer sat. Customers loved him, and the further up he went, the leaders loved him because he listened. And he said he listened really intently, and he focused on them so much from the physiology, because he was low in hearing, so he had to almost lip read. And he creates this great story where he, in fact, after he got ear implants done, he actually lost 2 customers because he could hear them so well. He started looking around their office. Yeah, good on you. It's going well. It's nice over there. I hadn't noticed that picture before. And they started to, it was just this subtle thing that he started to get less connections. And he actually rang one of them and said, look, I'm just not getting the meetings, and we lost our connection. He goes, and then the leader said to him, well, you're kind of not paying attention to me anymore. It feels like you just take me for granted. And what he realized was that he had been using his disadvantage to an advantage, and he had to quickly switch gears. But I think it's also being, what you talked about was being very emotionally intelligent and being aware. And I think you spoke about being aware of your children, but also being aware that I am different. I'm going to this environment. You're in Atlanta. What are the things that I'm different about? I've realized before I've gone in, and seen that as, okay, so that's the facts. How can I use that as an advantage, or just not see it as a disadvantage?
That's right. Yes. In fact, Rob, I now when I get invited, or when people ask me to come and speak to women leaders, and they say, can you design something for women leaders? I'm like, no. Why are we even designing a different module for them? They are just
Yeah.
leaders. Of course, the fact that I come in, or probably they look at me as somebody who they kind of aspire to be, or could look at as a little bit of a role model. That's fine, but we're not going to design something different for female leaders. It has to be
Right.
same. Of course, there is. Look, I don't take away the added layer that we do have, because we're also mothers. We also have a little bit additional responsibility of running the house, all said and done, with all due respect to all the males. But we
Yes.
do have that added thing. But that we just have to work around it. Like I said, that can't become also an excuse of sorts. To say that's why.
And you've lived in a lot of countries as well. I mean, sometimes I read your bio about all the places you've lived, and I thought, my God, she's been on the run. I mean, is this some sort of criminal I'm talking to? No, I'm kidding. Did you find that in any country there was difference, though, between the male, female side in leadership? Did it vary anywhere in any particular region or country, or was it just not really?
Actually, every region has their nuances, right? If you think of it at a nuance level. And that for example, I come from India, and India, very broadly saying, again, India is so diverse. There's one rule will not apply to 1.3 billion people, but in general, it is it is a patriarchal society, and but then again, if some companies would have it differently than the others. A lot of Indian companies would probably have a little different culture than a multinational company. Of course, some societies are more open than the others. So I would broadly say, let's say in Asia, it's still little, hierarchy driven. It's not male female, but it's little hierarchy. So and then add to that a male female thing. It's a little different versus let's say in the US where there could be discrimination, but it's very subtle. It's not very prominent. So it's different country like Latin America, surprisingly, at least to me, surprisingly, maybe, I thought females had a stronger voice there. Like a lot of leaders that I worked with and the teams that I worked with, they had some really strong women leaders. So it's those nuances that differ by the region. And it's very interesting because as you go in, you take a couple of days and couple of weeks to study that whole, the dynamic and the environment. And then you quickly, understand what's going to work here, what's not going to work here. How do you need to tweak your style a little bit here and there?
Yeah, it's interesting about South America. My experience was like that as well. And I found that generally in business, they were more open, more collaborative. It was all about getting to know you as a person. And there's just simple things like we might go out in the old days before pre-COVID and have lunch, you get to know each other. Then we would talk personally about family, and then we would get on to business, right?
Correct.
Whereas if you do the US, it's kind of all about business and almost a shield goes up, and Australia's not so much too different like that. Whereas I found Latin America was more that like, they're almost like European in a way. It's like if you're in Italy or France, it's very similar to family and bonding, and then we talk about business. So I'm not surprised. I think the command and control thing, is a good point to bring up. I still think there's a lot of command and control around versus, and that kind of command and control and transactional leadership versus transformational leadership around as well. And I think we're at this interesting crossroad, and I love your view on this, but I'm finding we're in this interesting crossroad of generations where the younger generation are wanting more transformational leaders, and some of the more established leaders who have come from command and control are really struggling to make that shift. Have you seen that kind of shift between, we're at this kind of rocking point, I feel, at the moment, and just seeing that across Asia, but also in Australia as well, as we're shifting from more transactional leadership to maybe more transformational?
That's right. I think you make a great point there, because also leaders are realizing what worked in the past is not going to work going forward. Because there's a younger workforce coming in. Also, teams are getting more diverse in terms of nationalities, and also in terms of they're getting more virtual. Not only now because of COVID-19, but rarely do I find a leader whose team is all stationed in the same city or same country where they are. More than ever, organizations are more geographically separated, right? If you're a leader in the past, or maybe 15 years back or 20 years back, you went to an office, you had your team sitting there, you worked with them, you told them what to do, you got quick feedback, there was, or you could walk up to them and you could get the answers. Now you have to get used to a fact that, okay, your team is, 2 members of your teams are sitting with where you are, but 2 are, let's say, if I'm talking about an office in Singapore, let's say 2 are sitting in Australia, 2 are sitting in China, 2 are sitting in Thailand, and therefore, and then you have to wait. There's a time difference. You have to wait to get your answer. The way you're going to communicate is going to be different. So it's challenging leaders at a lot of different levels, and then of course the drastic shift of the way digitization and technology is kind of progressing. So you're right. Transformation, if leaders are not going to transform, they won't be able to sustain, because organizations are more brutal than probably before. If you don't perform, you're out, right? So
yes, I agree. And I'm also seeing that Gen Z, and your kids are probably being even after that one, but mine are in the Gen Z space. But they are, when they talk about diversity, they don't talk about diversity being important. They see it as not an option. It's not even a discussion point.
Yes.
And so it's really interesting as a Gen, I'm a Gen X, and probably you are as well, if you're a Gen X, it's more like, we recognize diversity and we encourage and we embrace diversity. They're not embracing it, they're demanding it. They demand diversity because they know, that, well, from my view anyways, they seem to know that diversity gives us a much richer view of the world. And to your point, now you're seeing different people coming, and our team may be remotely all around the world. And so therefore we have to have this over this, or as leaders we're going to fail. Would that be your view as well?
That's right. No, also, you make a great point about diversity, and I'll share a little story. Singapore is quite a hub for diversity, in the sense that we have a lot of expats here, and they're from all over the world. So my kids go to an international school here, and one day my daughter came back, and she's turning 8 now, and she asked me, she's like, "Mama, are you and Papa both from the same country?" I said, "Yeah, we're both from India." She's like, "Oh, that's so boring." I'm like, "What do you mean?" Because all her friends have parents of 2 different nationality. Her best friend, her mother's from Hong Kong and her father's French. Her second friend, her father is British and mother is European. Is German. So.
Right.
So these kids, or this this whole generation is growing up with diversity as such a norm. They don't feel, when my kids go to, let's say Australia, when we go for holiday, or when we go to Europe, like for them, it's nothing. It's like normal. This is the new normal, right? They don't find
Right.
they're in a foreign country or people are looking different than them. For them, that's not even a point to consider.
Yes. It's almost like, I think it's almost for the generations coming through now. It was exciting for us to travel, and exciting for you. You worked in these different countries. Now it's almost like the earth is becoming flat again. You know what I mean? Like we're going to go cross, and communications and technology, and COVID's accelerated it, no doubt, but we were going that way, whereas the earth is more flat, and we can move and cross and change. And then when we connect, when we do connect face to face, it'll be really interesting when we end up doing conferences and things like that, which I think are always a great thing.
Yes.
But yeah, it is very different, isn't it? And even now, I mean, I cannot believe, like, my kids are just so into US politics, and that just was something. I don't know about you, but growing up, that wasn't I'm not even into local politics, maybe local for you, but they're so into the global.
Correct.
Yes, but global politics and global politicians, almost like brands, aren't they?
That's correct. That is correct. Like my 10-year-old knows Trump, and why Trump is not good and why Trump is not great. Like they have a discussion of that. I'm like sitting in Singapore, like a tiny dot so far off.
Yeah. That's crazy. Hey, look, I want to talk about your book, because Leader's Block was really fascinating when I came across the title. And I thought, gee, that's really interesting. And I think COVID, for me anyway, I thought, wow, I'm seeing a lot of what I think is leader's block. But I'm going to ask the guru and the expert about leader's block. So tell me, what is leader's block to you, and where did the inspiration for the book come from?
Okay, so let me answer the first thing about leader's block. So leader's block, the phrase or the word, is taken from writer's block. Just as writers in their journey go through a phase when they kind of, experience a slow kind of where they experience the creativity slowing down, where they are not able to come up with best of their work, or best of their writing. Similarly, leaders block is a phase where leaders experience that little bit of a slowdown in their journey where they are not on top of their game. That's a phase when they are disengaged, where they feel demotivated and uninspired. So it's a phase just like writer's block.
And is it anything to do with, or in your research for it, did you see anything to do with age or time in a leader role? Or is there anything that sort of, I guess, could be signals that someone's about to have leader's block?
Okay, great. So what I did was, for the book, I've interviewed over 200 leaders, across the world, different industries, different gender, different levels in the organization. So what I have for my book, I picked up leaders who've had at least 10 to 12 years of experience and above, all the way to CEO. So it's got the whole range. Now, to answer your specific question, in my interviews and in my research, I found that you start to, early on in your career, you probably don't experience leader's block. And even if you do, you get over it fast. And the reason I say that is because early on in your career, if you get stuck, you have lots of options. Firstly, you're very open for asking for help. You go and ask for help. You look for options. They are typically very laid out roles early on in your career where you know what's expected of you. Your manager communicates much more. The roles are much more defined. But as you go up in your career, that's where roles start to become more ambiguous. You've got to deal with uncertainty. You've got to start making sense of things that are given to you. At the same time, you start to develop reluctance to ask for help. Because your egos, as leaders, our egos start coming in and we start thinking like, oh, we are leaders, so therefore we should know it all. And therefore the delay in asking for help, putting up your hand saying, I do not know, I need help, that then gets you into a leader's block and makes you stay in it longer.
Love it. So why does that happen, Ritu? I'm fascinated with why. To me, it's almost like the leaders don't have psychological safety themselves. We talk about leaders creating psychological safety for their team, but I feel that leader of leaders, and even therefore the leader doesn't feel like their psychological safety to go, you know what, I don't know, or I've empowered my team. And why do you think that happens?
I think actually it's more systemic. So just as a society, and I'm talking like just globally, just as a corporate society, there is this expectations of leaders. We put leaders a little bit on like a pedestal, almost like we look up to our leaders like superheroes. That they will know it all, they will have all the answers. So that's one part of the peer pressure or the society pressure. And it's also self-inflicted because look, we've all worked hard to get to the position of leadership where we've come to, right? Because we've, from competition and, the pyramid keeps getting steeper. So you've obviously kind of, working hard, you've kind of, passed your competition and you've got to top. Now to get there and then say, oh, I don't know this, you start to feel, how can I let that go? Like, how will all these people who are looking up to me, how will they feel? Or am I letting them down? Am I not capable? So there is one part of letting others down. There's one part of letting yourself down, saying, oh, I thought I knew it, or I'm supposed to know it, and this is how it's supposed to be done. And therefore start the self-doubt, start the downward spiral thing of just being stuck and not asking for help. So I guess it's just pressure of society and of ourselves on us as leaders.
And to me, though, it's weird because the role of a leader is to create more leaders.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of leaders forget that that's their role. Their role is to create more leaders. So if your role is to create more leaders, then by modeling the way, you ought to be encouraging those coming up, like who's replacing me? Who is the team I'm going to have replace me? So therefore, I really, I don't need to have imposter syndrome. I should be going, you know what? Actually, I don't know all the answers here.
Yeah.
Who my team does.
Correct. And that is I think that's also the new age leadership. I mean, if I can use that word very loosely.
Sure. Yeah.
Because also, in the past, leaders were supposed to know it all, right? It was very knowledge centric. You knew your stuff. But now, you know that anybody can Google and get to know, right? So subject matter expertise is only this much that's required from a leader. Leader is really paid to make all the right decision. So therefore it's no more about getting answers for your team. It's about getting the answers from the team now.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's the shift. But even then, Rob, and what's fascinating to me, if you think about it, if you look at leaders anyway, look at sports, look at entertainment, look at politics. Every leader has its peak and will have its trough, right? A sports person will have a bad season, will stay out of the team, will recover, will exercise, will recuperate, come back in the team. Similarly, an entertainer will have a bad movie, will kind of take a little break and come back. It's the same thing with leaders in the corporate world. It's okay if you've had a bad quarter. You're allowed that.
Right.
And that's why even in the book and generally when I speak, I talk about that why don't we allow our leaders for that? If they've had a bad quarter, it's okay. Let's find out what they're struggling with and then help them overcome it.
I love that point. It's a fantastic point to allow the break, because I think in my book, one of the things I also spoke about was this need for rebuild, this need for relaxation. And what I put it down to is in motorsport, Ritu, because in every high performance, every Formula One race, after every MotoGP race, the engine is taken out of the car and is fully rebuilt before the next race.
That's right.
But we don't do it to ourselves. It's completely logical. Well, Lewis Hamilton was driving it, at the red line. He was pushing it as hard as he could. He won. We don't expect to go, well, let's just leave it there and change the oil, Lewis, and we'll drive it next weekend. It comes out, it gets redone, it gets rested, and he gets rested, the engine gets rested, it gets replenished. We put it back in to go high performance. And in my sport of cycling, you're doing this and then it's the peaks. But in leadership, we're trying to go, we're going to be going faster, bigger, better, more, bigger, better, more, bigger, better, more. And when someone falls over, we think, oh my God, what do we expect?
That's right.
I love that point that you can have a bad quarter, or there's a time to relax, or a time to build that in, or bring another leader in. And sabbaticals and things like that seem to have gone out the door. But I think in anything, it's high performance and high performance leadership. I said that bandied around a lot, but to me, that's about all the elements of high performance, which is basically rest and rejuvenation, relearning skills, and then going forward again.
That's right. Yeah, that's the whole point. And therefore, I thought it was a good topic, or it was actually almost an important topic to bring out. And my hope with the book is that people start to have more open conversation, more open dialogues, and therefore then they can pass it on to their teams, because once they do it themselves, their teams can follow it too. And also, Rob, I realize that as humans, till we can name something, till we can label something, we don't even acknowledge it. Forget about doing something.
Yes.
To do it.
Yeah,
so,
it's great to brand it, isn't it? So I love that the scenario and of course your programs after that are called Unblock, which I love, because that's leaders block and how do we unblock, which are all the things. What are the most popular in your Unblock programs you've done? What are, say, the top 3 things that people, your audience members or leaders in those sessions have really resonated with? What's maybe the top 3?
So typically there are 2 or 3 insights. Okay, so first insight that people get out of attending either a speech where I'm giving on this or the programs that I've run, one is just the ability to acknowledge that, they get a space where they acknowledge that, yes, everybody is going through it. Because all the 200 plus leaders I interviewed for the book, everybody said, yes, they've had a phase when they were not on top of their game, and then of course the reasons and triggers were different, but everybody said that. And when I shared that with people, there's almost like a sigh of relief. People we thought we were the only ones. Like, everybody is going through it. So that's the biggest aha thing people get, saying, oh, I'm not in this alone. And then the other thing is about, it's temporary. We will come out of it. And the third insight is the 5 strategies that I give them that they can apply anytime that they are stuck, anytime that they get blocked. And they can pick one of them, two of them, or a combination of them. But those are like very easy to remember strategies. That's what they walk out from the session.
You talked a little bit about when the weight comes off the shoulders there, and I'm, you've no doubt read this. I've read this where a lot of leaders feel lonely at the top.
Yes.
And they feel like that, and it's an incredible amount of people who are like that, and it leads to mental health and oftentimes into depression.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that leaders are still lonely at the top?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, when I was writing the book, Leaders Block, I thought about it, that, what happens if leaders block is not addressed? And, I'm just going to take a step back and explain the way I position leaders block. So there is this very commonly used American term called getting into a funk. It's more global. Like people say, oh, I'm in a funk right now. Basically means, oh, I'm not feeling too great. So basically you take a day off, or you go watch a movie, do something, you come back and you're refreshed and recharged. And then the other extreme is the burnout, the depression, right? And then leaders block is in between. So if your funk continues for weeks, then it's no more a funk, then probably it's leaders block.
Yes.
And if your leaders block, which is typically can range from 3 months to 6 months, if leaders block continues beyond that, or if it's not addressed, it can then lead to burnout, depression, loss of job. So leaders block is almost a precursor to burnout, or to losing of your job, or more drastic things like that. So your question is, why do I think leaders are lonely at the top? Is again goes back to what I was saying, because the ability to ask for help is not there. Like they're never taught that they can actually ask for help and it will be okay. And also the expectations from the organization, and then their whole reputation, their whole self-inflicted thing about, I should have known it all. So it's a culmination of all of that.
Yeah.
Plus also, leaders don't necessarily invest in the inner circle where they can talk about their own challenges, own dilemmas without the fear of being judged. That, when I work with leaders, I tell them, who are your 4 or 5, crisis managers? Like, whom do you call when you get stuck, at work or even at home? When you had a bad day, like, who are those people? Do you have? And Rob, I know it may sound surprising, but very often, like, leaders can't go beyond 1 or 2 names. Like, they're like, oh, I'll talk to my spouse, or maybe but that's it.
I agree. And I've found similar things in Australia, Ritu, to that point. It's really, they don't have it. But, sometimes I feel sometimes that we kind of flatter ourselves of how important we think we are. And we flatter ourselves that people will judge us. You know what? Most people couldn't care less, actually. And they're actually really interested to help us out as individuals. People we do like that. It's a human trait that we do. I do find that sometimes we're really not kind to ourselves at all. We tend to think, oh my God, what will people think? And I'm up here now and I position myself up here, but really I'm on rocky ground. And if I let anyone kind of know that maybe it's not all as good as I made it out to be, you know what? But oftentimes we flatter ourselves. People really aren't watching us that much. They really don't. They care actually a lot about themselves more than they care about us. And we should ask. And we should ask our team. And I think that I love the whole part of empowering our team and asking our team. And just recently, one of the guy I won my World Sailing Championship with, Ken Reed, he's the CEO of North Sails, huge global organisation. He's a 9-time world champion. He's unbelievable. Anyway, I was reading an interview with him in one of the yachting magazines, and one of the things I felt was really interesting, he said, I've always aimed to be the dumbest guy in the room. Right? Now, I would never call Ken dumb, but I love that phrase, I've always aimed to be the dumbest guy in the room. In other words, I've surrounded myself with really good people who know more than I do in all those spots that's not my forte, but I've just surrounded them. And I think when you do that and you have that attitude, you have no problem empowering your team or going to that network. And I love that point about, I'm sure it's one of your strategies. It's got to go from 1 to 5, in terms of that people you can connect to when you have that dilemma been on the personal side or on the business side.
That's correct. That's correct. Exactly. And therefore, there is this rise of now people reaching out, leaders more and more reaching out to external coaches or mentors, which is really nice because you have
Yes.
a sounding board, or you have a person to speak with, to share, share things, and yeah, and kind of talk it out, because sometimes you just
And
need that.
yeah, because sometimes you're in your own little bubble, and and it's like the problem in my head is like this big, and the problem in everyone else's life is like this big, and you need that perspective, because it is, you can't not say it's not that big, because it is that big to that particular person, but in perspective we can do that. Hey, let's talk about big. You manage, so at Genpact, which was one of the offshoots of GE, you managed like 1,000 people, and across different delivery centers and countries. What is that is, I've never managed that many. So managing 1,000 people, what were the things that you had to do? And you say you're moving from managing 100 people to managing 1,000. What's the biggest shift in your mind when that happens as a leader?
Gosh. I'm trying to think where to start and keep it very crisp for you.
Yeah.
I would say, so I'll give a little bit of background. I started managing teams quite early in my career. It just so happened, I got into roles which were thing. And like my first team I managed, I had 15 people, and most of them were more seasoned than I was. They knew the stuff. Plus also they were more senior in terms of more experience by number of years.
Right.
And I had come new to the team, and I was leading the team. Very early on, I realized that if I have to succeed, I have to kind of, get them to work with me, not work for me, and that combined by some really great leaders that I worked for helped me kind of hone that skill over a period of time.
Yeah.
And before I actually jumped to 1,000 people, I was managing about 350 people. Even there, one of my success mantra was, if you can get the entire team that you're handling aligned to one big vision, or one big thing that ties everybody. So in this case, let me talk specifically. When I was handling 1,000 people, we were doing some projects for a client, and we all had the same client we were serving. So this whole account I was handling.
Yes.
And when I took over, the NPS score wasn't that great. And one of the things that my boss told me was, in the next 12 months, we've got to really turn the NPS around. So when I took over, one of the things I told my team, because they were in 8 different places. So firstly, I had to just constantly be on the flight and be meeting them. So I invested a lot of time being in these different delivery locations and spending time with them. And of course, doing town halls and just meeting them in smaller groups, going out for lunches, dinner. So there was lots of that to build that momentum. But I very clearly gave them a thing saying, we need to improve our NPS from this to this. And those were like 5 words. And they were, my communication team did a big printing of them. But every time I addressed any group, whether it was my direct reports, whether it was their teams or their teams, I only linked everything to that NPS score from 5 to 50, and so then every time any review happened, any conversation happened, I would only ask the teams, okay, what you're telling me is fine, we'll talk about, but is it helping improve NPS from 5 to 50?
Yeah.
And they would say yes or no. And if they said no, I'm like, then I need to be here, or then do we need to be talking about it? So of course this is the operational stuff, but at an emotional level, what that did, that definition of that vision was so embedded that anytime we got a good email from a client, everybody would share it and would say, oh, one step towards 5 to 50.
I love that. Yeah. So the communication, so I love that point about when you're scaling it becomes even more important to have the vision locked in from top to bottom. The strategy, everything we do is locked into that particular vision, to that particular metric. And I think the other thing you're doing is you're measuring the metric, and everyone knows the metric. I think that's a really interesting point that I saw an interview with Jamie Dimon recently from JP Morgan, And he talked about holding the line and with his team that when they make a decision, a strategic decision, they have an index or a number. And he said it's so important. He said when I'm speaking in San Francisco or I'm speaking in New York or I'm speaking in Hong Kong, that it doesn't. He said I sound like a broken record to myself, but I know if I go off that to any point, the guys in Hong Kong will go, hey, Joe didn't say that in San Francisco. And he said, I just got to keep on going. We go back to the strategy. I love your point was exactly that. So how does that affect this? Because that's what we're aiming to get to. And I think just holding the line is something, I think great leaders do. And I see other leaders sometimes bend. They bend to the local conditions or they bend to something and all of a sudden we've lost the momentum and people just don't understand. And when you get to 350 even, but even 1,000 is even more crazy. There's more people who all of a sudden you've got 1,000 different views of what that number could be or what it means.
Correct. And I think also one of the things I've realized is that, is the whole emotional connect to a vision or, to anything that you're putting, to a goal, right?
Yes.
Because people have to get that sense of pride once they get that number or once they know. So when our mid NPS came out, we inched obviously more. So people, and I remember the time where our NPS scores, like the surveys had gone out and the results are going to come out, how everybody in all different centers are like sitting on tenterhooks waiting for that result to come out.
Right.
It almost creates that whole bonding and that, it's almost like sport thing, right? Like your team wins.
Right.
So you almost create that same camaraderie with different delivery centers, with different teams, just by attaching them to something that they imbibe and they feel emotionally attached to.
Yeah, I love that point. I've always been a big believer in profit share. I learned that when I was at HP, and we had a global profit share that everybody, no matter what you did in HP, you got a percentage of your salary was dedicated to profit share. It was something that was very much part of the HP way from Bill and Dave in the early days. And when I was there, it was one that, and the HP profit share was announced twice a year. And it was the 2 times in the year that everybody, like, and there's 140,000 employees, everyone was locked in to what the number was, but the important thing apart from that was the other days of the year and hours, we all were in together. Because whenever that tough, tense time came, we needed a favour from another division. And I moved around a few divisions, but if I needed help from the PC guys or the printer guys or the e-commerce guys or the e-business guys, everyone knew, it's tough, I'm really busy. But you know what? Everyone thought, this is good for the business.
Yes.
It might be tough for me right now, but this makes sense from an HP point of view, from a brand point of view. We should all help. And because this makes sense from the customer. This is good for the customer. And if it's good for the customer, then it's good for us. And that's the way we worked. And really, sometimes just that one number, as you talked about, there were 1 or 2, maybe 3 things at most, really aligns teams. I think that's a really great point, just holding that NPS and everything being related to it, because so many things, you can have great ideas, but sometimes they're just, is that connect to that, or is that maybe for next year? You don't kill it, but it's something for not quite on strategy.
Exactly. Yeah. And just an interesting trivia on my role or during that tenure, I had 6 direct reports, 6 males, and of 6 different nationalities. So we were like really, we were quite like, there was a joke internally in the company. We were like quite the picture of a team with with a female leader and 6.
Right.
It was quite.
You're like the United Nations, wouldn't you?
Exactly. So it is. It was really. I mean, I had a blast in that role, even though I traveled so much. But it was good. It was good.
I think also you came through it. You spent a lot of your years in GE, and I spent time in HP, and you were more years in GE. But I think also both those organisations, but I've acknowledged afterwards, was they both had really good high potential programs. They also had great. They were building a pipeline of leaders, Ritu, and that's something I don't see enough organisations doing. I'm quite passionate about that. They're not building their pipelines. That's something you've observed as well.
Yes. In fact, GE had this great rotation program where, every a year and a half, you would rotate to a different role, or you would get exposure to a different part of the business. So if I look at my career, I mean, I started off in finance, then I did a stint with Six Sigma black belt role. Then I went to become a client relationship manager. Then I went to lead a business vertical. So very different. They give you exposure to very different things. And also, because when you start very young, you're not sure, really very sure of what you really want to do or where you want to take your career. And if the organization can support you in exploring a little bit, that is so great for the individual and for the organization both. Just nurturing the talent like that was amazing.
Yeah, 100% agree. Hey, we're just about out of time, but my last question for you, what would be the top 3 things that would come to mind for you for a young leader? So thinking back to you when you had that first team of 15, for example, what would be your advice to someone who's now gone from a great superstar performer in whatever role, but is now managing a team of 15 for the very first time? What would be 3 things you think are really important to do?
So 3 things. I think one of the most important thing is what I call, self-management or self-awareness, or self-leadership, because that is not something that's taught to, I feel that's not taught at an early stage. It's not taught in MBA schools and stuff like that. So self-management or leading yourself before you lead others is one of the most important thing. Even as I look back, I wish somebody had told me more. I emulated the leaders I watched, but if I knew more about this, I probably would have managed even better. It's like the captains of the team, right? So you lead yourself before you lead the team. That is my first advice to first-time leaders is build your self-awareness, know your triggers, know your blind spots, know what works for you, doesn't work for you. So kind of start to build that self-awareness. That's number 1. Number 2 is communication. I mean, I know it's a very commonly abused words, but just the ability to communicate with empathy, with compassion. I mean, it's all because, again, like I was saying, you want your team to work with you and not for you. I think, and that happens when you just open up and your communication is really good. And communication is more at a personal level. You're just not doing it because an organization requires you to do. So focus a lot on not what you are saying, but how you are saying. I think that is really the key. So second one is communication. And the third piece I would say is, and I know I've said this in communication, but this is going to be, I think, one of the top most skills required for 21st century is empathy. You have to develop, and inherently as humans we have that a little bit, but it has to be developed. Empathy, we can't take empathy for granted. It has to be developed. You have to know what the barriers for it are, and therefore how do you develop more. So you could start by saying, even I was doing this program with a group of young leaders, and I said, so there was this leader who had 5 team members. I said, what kind of coffee this person in your team likes? He's like, I said, does he have black coffee or does he have a latte? Or, so we just played this game. Like, do you know what coffees your team drinks? And just 5 members. So it's connecting, at that level. So self-management, communication, and empathy.
I like that last one, and sometimes you got to start with. I find with leaders, if they're, for example, got their partner or children, ask them how much empathy they have with their partner or children. Do they know their children's best friends at school? Do they know their names? Do they know their? Hopefully, they don't know their partner's coffee, but sometimes just something about that just starts to connect and go, oh my God, I'm not even doing empathy at home. How on earth can I start? In the office? And so it becomes, and I think those sort of skills and traits actually develop as just as better people, as opposed to, not only as leaders. So I love that self-leadership. I think John Maxwell made that great quote, I think, as well. He said, he said, there's leaders, you can lead an organization, you can lead a team, but he said, leading yourself is actually the hardest. He said, it's really easy to tell everyone to go and do that, but are you doing it yourself? Are you modeling the way? And they said, we've got to ask that question. And many times we don't. We're kind of telling people what they should be doing, but we're not actually doing it ourselves. And I love that point. That's absolutely spot on. Hey, thanks, Ritu. It's been fantastic, this session. We've covered so much ground. tell us where is the book available? Is it available in all the major online, offline bookstores?
Yes, so the book is available, and I have right here. So this is a book. The book is available on Amazon. So it's there. Yeah, so people, if they're interested, they can go on Amazon and they can order it.
And your website, what's the best website for you?
So the website, if you want to know more about Leaders Block, they can go to www.leadersblock.com. It's an easy to find domain. And you could also go to ritumehrish.com. That's the website where I tell a little bit about myself. But more about Leaders Block is on leadersblock.com.
Fantastic. Hey, it's been fantastic talking to you today. We've covered so much ground. Really enjoyed it, as always. And let's hope we'll do some more stuff down that track. And of course, now COVID's brought us together, so we can't say that's a bad thing. We love COVID because it's brought us across the oceans together. So fantastic. That's awesome. And we'll catch you very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rob, for having me. Really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.